What's up, my know-it-alls? It's that time again. That's right, Moon Knight, Disney Plus's adventure superhero series, episode 3, The Friendly Type. Not a bad episode. I think it's interesting what they're doing, and we're going to get into it right now. In episode 3 of Marvel Studios' Moon Knight, The Friendly Type, Stephen Grant is forced into the passenger seat as mercenary Mark Spector takes control over their body. In Cairo, Mark is in pursuit of the zealot Arthur Harrow, who seeks to unleash the Egyptian deity Ammit from confinement. Following the events of the previous episode, Summon the Suit, Harrow is now in possession of the Golden Scarab, a compass that leads to Ammit's Ushabti. Mark must complete his last mission for Khonshu without interference from Stephen. Otherwise, the God of the Moon threatens he will make Mark's estranged wife, Layla El-Faouly, his next avatar. Layla, on the other hand, refuses to let Mark make decisions for her without her consultation. Okay, man, I tell you what, I really like, and I'm starting to dig this show. So it's funny, normally what they call that sophomore episode or the third episode is usually where a story slumps or lulls. That's not the case with this show. So let's jump right in. So the episode starts with us seeing Layla. Layla's talking to somebody just off camera, and she's what looks like in front of sort of a DMV poster. Not really sure what's going on at the time. But then you cut to the lady who's helping her, and it seems like that person is essentially helping her make some fake credentials, specifically passport. And as they're talking, you get the vibe that Layla's maybe not welcome in the place she's going. Turns out she's heading to Egypt. Well, who else do we know is in Egypt? Obviously, the end of last episode, Mark is in Egypt, and but we don't get to him just yet. First thing we do is we cut to what looks like a desert where people are walking through the desert together, and then the camera pans over and you see the hand of Arthur Harrow, and he's got the little scarab beetle compass thing, and he's sort of looking at it, and it's floating, and it's doing its little compassy thing, telling people where things go. That's what compasses do. Anyway, and as he's going, he eventually reaches what they believe to be the place. Then we cut very clearly to what looks like a set. It's a rooftop scene, and you get to see Oscar Isaac kind of running and jumping, and he's in Mark Spector mode, full-on Mark Spector mode. Now, there was some speculation last week that potentially we might have actually seen the beginning of Jake Lockley, which is another personality that I'm assuming will show up before long. If not this season, probably in a future season, but because there's actually more than one. For those of you who don't know, the character of Moon Knight actually has 3 personalities that are very distinct. There's the Mark Spector, which we know, mercenary, assassin, professional, that whole bit. There's Stephen Grant, who in the comic book, Stephen Grant is sort of a Bruce Wayne type. He's rich, affluent, has a lot of gadgets and stuff, and he usually, and I don't know that, well, yeah, I guess he does sort of take on the personality of Mr. Knight, but whatever. And then there's Jake Lockley. Jake Lockley is a personality that is on more street level, so he's sort of in the on the grounds, interacts with people and whatnot, and I think we're starting to get a little bit of that. So in this opening, you see Oscar Isaac's Mark Spector, and while he's doing his thing and fighting this guy, and he's the sword fights, and he's getting him, and he sees a reflection, and it's Steven who's like, "No, don't do it, Mark." And the next thing you know, you get that same not transformation, but that transition sequence, the whole like all blinking and stuff, and then you see Steven. He wakes up driving a car, and he gets out. He's not driving a car, rather. He's in a taxi. Sorry. He's in a taxi, and he's outside of, I guess, a police station of some sort, and the guys he was chasing come out of the police station, and he realizes he was not in the driver's seat. So what's great is this entire episode flips the status quo that we've had for 2 episodes. By that I mean, what you get is Mark Spector being the one who's suddenly realizing his body's being taken over against his will and whatever. Stress, this and that, who knows. So then he proceeds to chase the guy, and eventually he backs the guy up. And as he's looking into the mirror, you suddenly see this. You see Steven say to him, "He's like, don't do it, this and that." And then again, that same transformation, and suddenly Mark is on what looks like a plateau overlooking a city, and he's got the two guys he's been fighting, specifically the younger one with there's a guy with a faux hawk and whatnot. Big respecter of the faux hawk, by the way. Come on. Anyways, and so he hears the voice of Khonshu, who's like, take him to the edge. He'll talk. It's very cool. And so I love that voice. I'm sorry. F. Murray, love you, man. Love you. Friend of the show. Anyways, so what happens is Mark does it. Now, let's back up for 2 seconds. Mark, this time, is the one who wakes up. And there's a knife in his hand. It's bloody. A guy's dead on the floor with a huge jab in his chest. And you get to someone. I don't think it's Steven. And Steven's even like, I don't know what's going on. It's got to be your body count. Look at yourself. This and that. So Steven's trying to blame Mark, and Mark's like, what the heck? This is why I think Jake Lockley. I think there's another personality that they're not showing us yet, and it's not Khonshu. So. The dude he's praised all glory to Ammit, and he cuts the tie that Mark's holding him by and falls to his death. And you see Khonshu and Mark looking over the ledge, and Khonshu's like, I would have sworn he was going to talk. It's really funny. And so essentially they're having a conversation, and Mark's like, he accosts him. He says, dude, can't the gods do something? And he's like, you don't want to go to talk to the gods. And finally, so Khonshu decides, all right, I don't want to do anything grandiose, so let's do something else to get their attention. And he proceeds to force a lunar eclipse. Everyone sees it. Arthur Harrow sees it, everybody and whatnot. And essentially what he's done is he's created a need to call the Ennead. The Ennead is the pantheon of Egyptian gods. Very similar to the Asgardians, but a different type. I guess these are real gods. Little g, I don't know. Anyway, so what ends up happening is, so Mark's asking him, he's like, hey, what does this mean, this and that? And Khonshu explains, okay, a doorway is going to open. We're all going to be going to someplace together. The doorway appears. And Mark walks through it and proceeds to find himself in the court of the Egyptian Ennead. Now, the court of the Egyptian Ennead is located in one place and one place only: the interior of the Great Pyramid in Giza. So I will say this, the production value is amazing. This thing looks gorgeous. This looks straight out of Stargate, the movie, or Indiana Jones or Tomb Raider. My point is or National Treasure. My point is they're doing a really great, I'm a huge fan of the set. It's very authentic looking, and you get to see other doors, and we get to see other avatars. Now, these are the Egyptian Ennead avatars. Do you know who was once part of the Egyptian Ennead? Bast. The Panther god or goddess Bast. Now, I don't, they mention names, and I know it's like Osiris or Isis rather, Isis they call her, Hathor and some other folks and whatnot. And then you see an African woman in a traditional type of, I don't want to say daishiki, but whatever. I think she's from Wakanda. And that's interesting because the Black Panther is supposed to be the avatar of Bast. Now, I could be wrong, but that's how it's been in the comic books. So it might be that this wasn't an avatar of Bast, but probably another one. But I feel like she's from Wakanda, especially because the accent she speaks with is very Nigerian, which a lot of the core. When Chadwick Boseman invented the Wakandan language, one of the first place he started was Nigeria. So, and he used Nigerian because so based on Marvel Comics where it's located, he said, okay, this is the cross section of countries, and he created the language. Anyway, this woman is speaking Wakandan with the Wakandan accent. And so I'm a firm believer that there's more than one potential avatar in Wakanda. But anyways, very interesting, good opportunity to start to blend a few things. And so Mark is essentially, when he gets there, he meets the avatar of Hathor, who explains to him, have you ever done this before? Do you know anything about this? He's like, no, I've got no clue. And she says, okay, it's kind of the new experience. It's very uncomfortable in the beginning. So come to find out, each of the avatars stands in a position. They suddenly, like while you're suddenly yourself, someone asks a question, and if the god who controls you is going to speak, all of a sudden it's like, and you suddenly speak and say something. And so that's really what happens. And so Mark is just kind of being used as Khonshu tells off the Ennead and is like, this guy's going to be doing something. Arthur Harrow needs to be judged. And they bring Arthur Harrow in order to have him, sort of, hey, if you're going to be accused of something, you need to stand again, face your accuser, I guess. And so when they bring in Harrow, he stands before the Ennead, and he proceeds to lie. Big shock. And he tells them, no, he says, listen, he's the one who's been, Khonshu my former master, has abused his power, abused his privilege, abused this and that. He's a problem, and he's even got a broken avatar. And so at this point, Mark, or I think it's Khonshu using Mark, tries to attack Harrow and gets stopped. That's right. The head of the Ennead stops him short. It's like, there will be no violence here. And at this point, they say, we want to talk to the avatar. Now, Mark gets an opportunity to talk, and he says, listen, this has nothing to do with my relationship with Khonshu. This is a bad man. And they're like, he hasn't broken any rules. And the truth is, to this point, he hasn't. Even though, I disagree. I take issue with that, because I think that at the end of the day, the moves he's making are those moves that are not the best for everyone. Anyway, so as everyone's as it culminates, and they threaten if Khonshu changes or alters the sky again, he's going to be placed in stone, which is their prison. I guess it's a way of them putting people in jail or whatever. So at that point, the avatar of Hathor pulls Mark aside and says there might be another way. There is a map. The guy who originally was part of the situation, built this and that, he's specific, like Shifu. You have to find his sarcophagus. So where's the one place you're going to find a sarcophagus like that? The black market. And sure enough, while Mark's trying to get into the black market, look who steps up, Layla. Layla's tracking down the same thing. So they decide to do it together. And they're on a party boat headed over to this guy's house. He likes to throw a big party, and they're talking, and they have a moment. But at the end of the day, they finally arrive, and it's like a little mini army. And dude has his own medieval times, as far as I'm concerned. It's an entire, looks like it's supposed to be, I guess, like spears on horses, but it looks like jousting from a glance. So I'm just like, really? Did you guys go to medieval times? Just ask you borrow the place for a little while? So Mark sees this interaction. He's supposed to be her husband, and Raffi gives him a weird name, whatever. Yet another ID or Persian alias for Mark to eventually get lost in. I don't know. But so this guy's all smarmy and whatnot. And so finally he's like, all right, you want to go into my collection? Here we go. And so they walk in, and while they're in there, they're looking for like a clue, a map of something. Layla's got some rudimentary understanding of the Egyptian language, but not nearly as much as Steven. And so every now and again, Mark looks up frustrated. You see Steven's reflection from above, and Steven's like, let me out. I can help. I know what I'm looking for. And Mark's like, no, I'm not. You better tell me what I need. And he's like, I'm not going to do that while I'm in jail. And so finally, he begins to tell him, fine. And so he tells him to start folding some papers and doing some things that are in the sarcophagus. And that's when one of the bodyguards of the guy whose house it is shows up and is like, look, man, what are you touching? And Mark disarms him. And finally Layla's like, give him his gun back. So he gives him his gun back. That's when Harrow shows up. And that's just what you want. You want Arthur Harrow showing up and causing trouble. And then he destroys the sarcophagus, all to prove to this spoiled rich kid how he can show him the wonders of ancient history. Because apparently this kid is a hardcore collector. But not just a collector. He believes in preserving history. Very, very big, high estimate of himself. Suffice to say, everybody turns around and spins. Mark's gone. Totally pulled a Batman. Gone. Until you look up, and he's standing there, and we get to see the same scene we've seen about a dozen times in the commercials and stuff. He jumps down, and his cape does this whole half moon thing. It's real dope. And he proceeds to fight, and they're shooting bullets at him. He covers Layla with his cape, and bullets bounce off the cape, and he eventually deflects them all back and proceeds to then start whooping up on everybody. Meanwhile, Layla inside the sarcophagus area is trying to collect up the few little pieces of this thing that might be left, the papers that were in the sarcophagus, because remember, sarcophagus is destroyed. So she's fighting this guy, this bodyguard guy, and she's doing a bang-up job, and the dude finally starts whooping up on her. She proceeds to take her necklace and jump on the dude and stab him. It's amazing. Cutting back to Mark, who's in the middle of his fight. At some point or other, you keep hearing Steven telling him, "Hey, Mark, you gotta stop." And finally, he transforms and becomes Mr. Knight. And so and at some point, the guys start stabbing him with spears, and he's like, "Mark, come back!" And he gives Mark the body back, and Mark becomes the real Moon Knight again. And so then Mark proceeds to become a pincushion. And as he's a pincushion, he looks up. Layla's trying to fight and defend herself, and he loses the mask. We get to see Oscar Isaac being real ticked off. And that's when they manage to... He unleashes and just takes all the spears that are in him, and all the guards around him, they have them in him now. The guy's a beast. Very, very cool. So they escape, and at that point, you get to see Khonshu standing watch over everything, and he's like, yeah, things are about to get bad. And so they begin to head out. They've got what they need, and they're trying to figure it out. So there's some people following them. I think it's probably the same people who've been following them. And Mark gets dressed, and he realizes, I can't do this. And so Layla's like, you need to just ask for Steve. We need Steven. So Mark proceeds to take his everything together, go to the side, and he says, all right, Steven, come do your thing. Steven shows up, and you get to see this really great in-character transformation from Mark to Steven with no effect. He's just sitting there, and he's like, he does his thing, and then, all right, there we go, thank you very much. And he's suddenly talking, and I'm like, oh, Oscar Isaac doesn't miss a beat. The guy's an amazing actor. And I'm telling you, whatever they paid him, it wasn't enough, because he's just doing amazing stuff. And so he puts everything together. Come to find out, it's constellations. Now, he points out to her, the issue is the stars back in the day were someplace different. So we can't use these to triangulate a position. Khonshu shows up and says, I remember that night. I remember every night. And then he decides to do something he knows very well he shouldn't. So he brings Steven up to the top, and Steven's the body of his avatar, so he's got to use his powers through him. And he transforms and becomes Mr. Knight, and then Khonshu tells him when Mark is back, tell him to find me. Tell him to find and free me. Because he knows. They warned him. The Ennead warned him. You mess with the sky, we're locking you in stone. Okay? He's been warned. He knows. He's been put on notice. Doesn't matter. Completely irrelevant. He does what he has to do. And you get to see the sky begin flying. And it's what looks like when they do the time lapse of stars and whatnot. So everything's sort of spinning. And people all over the world are seeing it. And it's this huge, like, what? I mean, you got to realize, in a Marvel universe, they're probably thinking to themselves, oh my God, it's Thanos again. What are we going to do? I don't know. I can't imagine what the world thinks. And so then suffice to say, at some point or another, they get to the sky that they're looking for. And Khonshu tells him, you have to hold it in place. And so they're sitting here, and he's holding it. And literally at one point, Steven's like, yeah, this is the most painful thing I've ever experienced. And the mask goes away. just as Khonshu begins to get sucked away because the Ennead is actually invoking their sentence. That's right. All of them are standing together, hand in hand, and you see a little statue starting to form from the stone in the middle of them, and little by little, the power of Khonshu gets sucked into a statue. The statue, and then a little bit later, you see Harrow and the guy who is the head of the Ennead. I don't know if he's supposed to be Ra or who, but either way, they walk together, and he's like, "You were right, you were right about Khonshu. We were wrong." And so then Harrow has a brief conversation with him, and he essentially says, "I want you to know, I have you to thank, because your abuse of me forged me in such a way that my victory will be because of you." And it's a real slap in the face move, but it's and that's how the episode ends. It ends right there, So all right. So what is the know-it-all index for this week? It isn't bad. This was a storytelling episode, but I liked it. They kept me. And I think that they earned so much goodwill with the first 2 episodes that I was willing to give a slightly slower episode, but it was never boring. It's very National Treasure. It's very Tomb Raider, very Indiana Jones, in that they are definitely searching for relics, and they're in Egypt, and they're in these places. I really like it. I'm gonna go, and it's not because I'm not judged I'm going 7. I'm going 7 this week. It wasn't a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely a little slower. But that one fight scene, the fight scene was really good. You got to see Moon Knight for a protracted amount of time, which I really like. And you got to see some really great acting from Oscar Isaac. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and bump it. I'll bump it up. I'll bump it to an 8. I think this is an 8 out of 10 episode. I enjoyed it overall, and I think it's leading into some good things. And it wasn't a slow episode by any stretch of the imagination, in terms of what we got. So there you go. Now you know. And if knowing is half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. All right, everybody. Well, please don't forget, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and click the little bell icon to be notified when new content drops. Hey, I really appreciate everybody who's started to kind of really gather around the Know-It-All Nation. Every one of you, I wish have a happy day and enjoy the show. And I cannot wait to talk to you guys next week. Never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all.